Ever since civilization cropped up, it appears humans have always worn something over their bodies. Fashion comes and goes. So let's see some of the things that people in history actually wore and the things that counted as fashionable. 20 items that people in history actually wore.
Welcome to Titanic. I'm the voice of Wacky Universe, bringing you another video.
20. The powdered wig. Wigs and hairpieces just recently became more popular again. But thank goodness that nowadays, they look nothing like powdered wigs anymore. During the 18th century, if you wore a white powdered wig, it signaled to others that you were a person of high status. Funny enough, King Louis XIII started this fashion to hide his premature balding. To keep the wigs as white as possible, men powdered them, hence the name. In the late 1700s, the British government taxed hair powder, which displeased a lot of people, and out went the trend. 19. Bombasting. To use the word bombasting means mostly two things: to talk boastfully, or to stuff your clothes with a bunch of material to make you look bigger. Either way, you get the picture. If you take a look from the fashion choices of the 16th century, you'll see that a lot of high-class citizens sported unusually puffy clothes or heavily padded dresses and robes, as you can see in this portrait of Edward IV of England, painted in 1546, or in really any portrait of Queen Elizabeth I. The amount of padding and stuffing could reach up to 6 pounds. 18. Footbinding. They say you need to go through some physical discomfort in order to obtain society's idea of beauty. And that idea was never more true than for those who practiced footbinding. It was popularly practiced starting from the Song dynasty from 960 AD in China all the way until the 20th century. In this time frame, people considered small feet a marker of beauty in women. But it wasn't enough to just have naturally small feet. To make them even smaller, the shape of the foot was altered by binding the feet to a smaller size, similar to the shape of these wooden representations, so that they could fit into those shoes. 17. The Hobble Skirt. It seems history loved making clothing, especially women's clothing, awfully uncomfortable. From binding your feet so you would basically be disabled and develop foot problems later on, to the beginning of the 20th century, where the fashion industry would introduce something less extreme, yet still not comfortable: hobble skirts. Like the name suggests, the skirt was designed to have a narrow opening, which impedes the skirt wearer's stride. Many point to the first women to fly in airplanes for the origination of this trend. Those women had to tie rope around their skirts to keep the wind from blowing through it during the flight. People then made this street fashion for a brief period of time. 16. Bullet bras. This one might not have been uncomfortable to wear per se, but it definitely looks a little uncomfortable to see all the time nowadays. The bullet bra looked like a regular bra by modern standards, except the padding came in the shape of a cone for some reason. The undergarment fashion trend started sometime in the 1940s and also went by the name of torpedo bra, which shows us that people back then knew exactly what these things looked like. These brassiere designs stayed relevant well into the 1950s, but soon faded into fashion by the next decade. 15. Flapper dresses. That new Great Gatsby movie came out a few years ago and resurged the popularity of the flapper dress for a time in that 21st century. But it also counts as a really popular Halloween costume or party-themed look. It seems the flapper dress, no matter how many decades has passed, will always be a go-to vintage party dress. Young Western women during the 1920s adopted the flapper style, which would be embraced back then as it was a way to challenge the old social norms of what women should look like. For the time, the hem of the skirt was short, stopping at above the ankle between the knees. It was loose, giving women more of a boyish figure. 14. Ancient Roman rings. During the time of the Roman Empire, wearing jewelry was a big part of the fashion. Men, however, were restricted to one piece of jewelry if they wanted to look like they had good manners and weren't boastful: rings. And just one ring at that. But of course, there were those who lavished their fingers in rings and wore a bunch of necklaces and crowns. Interestingly, male Roman citizens not only wore gold rings for fashion, but it also served as a practical way to be able to seal documents on hand, pun intended. 13. Chopins. We know that platform shoes have come back into fashion, but their predecessors do not look comfortable. The Chopin was among the first iterations of the platform shoe, though it looks a little different from the ones worn in the 1970s and 1990s. Shoes like this still exist today, with the history of the Chopin going all the way back to the 15th century. It would stay popular amongst courtesans and patrician women from then on until the 17th century. It was characterized as a clog shoe on a platform meant to keep the feet from getting dirty. 12. Breeches. People still wear breeches to this day, although they are slightly altered from the ones worn during the olden times. A pair of these covers the body from the waist, thighs, and stops below the knee. This article of clothing, mainly worn by men, gets fastened at the hem along its open seams with buttons or drawstring. It was part of Western men's fashion for a long time, starting around the 13th century and common until the mid-19th century. By then, trousers became the norm, as we see even in today's standards. 11. Goat hair unibrows. Once upon a time, society considered unibrows a sign of beauty, but we're talking way back in the past. Like during the time of the ancient Greeks. During this period in history, a woman with a unibrow was equated to a woman with a high level of intelligence. For those not born blessed with extra hair connecting between their eyebrows, there was a solution. Goat hair. The goat hair, mixed with tree resin, would be placed on the bridge of the nose. For a less realistic look, some women just use dark powder to color in between. 10. No eyebrows. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have no eyebrows. In the era of the Renaissance in Europe, a high forehead was considered the most beautiful part of a woman. As a result, women would wear their hair pulled back far and then get rid of their eyebrows by plucking them. A face with no eyebrows was considered a more beautiful face. To this day, people still bleach their eyebrows, even with the rise of the bushy and dark eyebrows trend. 9. Louis heels. No, not Louis Vuitton heels. The Louis heel refers to King Louis XV of France. He reigned from 1715 to 1774, and in that time, made his favorite shoe a favorite amongst the court as well. Yep, many men wore the shoe, and if you wore it, that meant you were up to current fashion and therefore had a lot of money. The way the heel design goes makes it easier for the wearer to remain stable, unlike a lot of other types of heels that don't splay out like the Louis heel does. 8. Egyptian eye makeup. If you thought people wear too much makeup nowadays, then you probably wouldn't find the beauty standards of ancient Egypt very pleasing. While we don't go as extreme on our eyeliner wings as often as the ancient Egyptians typically did, it does go to show that this type of heavy eye makeup still influences the beauty trends of today. From the black eyeliner designs of the 1960s to even today's most extreme beauty glam looks. But the Egyptians had a practical reason. Apparently, such heavy makeup helped them reduce the glare of the sun. 7. Perfume cones. Also something that was prevalent in ancient Egyptian fashion and beauty, perfume cones. As depicted in the old wall paintings of ancient Egypt, people were seen wearing these strange cone-shaped head ornaments. Historians say that these cones were made of animal fat and would melt, kind of like a scented candle, sans the fire. It would release a nice fragrance, hence the term perfume cones. 6. Crinolines. You ever wonder how women in the West would keep their dresses so wide and poofed back then? The secret was that under all that fabric, there was also something called a crinoline, keeping it buoyant. It was a structured petticoat that held out the skirt, often made of linen or horsehair and cotton. In 1856, the first steel crinoline was patented. By the 1870s, the fashion industry came up with smaller ones, as pictured, called crinolets. 5. Hoop skirt. In a similar fashion, we now get to the hoop skirt, a much more extreme version of the crinoline, the name given during the 19th century. Hoop skirts date as far back as the 1400s, when wider skirts became more the fashion. This version was called a panier, which came complete with those wide side hoops. The panier was more common during the 1700s. During the era of the Tudors, a hoop skirt was referred to as a farthingale. 4. The Symington side lacer. Earlier, we discussed the flapper dress at some length and how the purpose of it was to make a woman's body appear more angular and boyish, diminishing the curves. One way to help do that, which is like the opposite of a corset, was to wear a Symington side lacer. These types of brassieres had little support and fabric and was utilized as a way to minimize the bust area so that you'd look as skinny as this Parisian flapper. 3. Hair rings. People still wear hair rings to this day. These are a pair of lock rings made of gold, which were discovered in Wales back in 2015. Thought to be used as rings worn in your hair, it shows the fashions of the Bronze Age in Europe. These items were usually made of solid gold or were made of clay and then plated in gold. These particular ones were made and worn around 1000 BC. At first, archaeologists thought they may be earrings, but seems more likely that they were used for hair. 2. Stilts. Imagine if people wore stilts just walking through their front yards and to their neighbors' houses, instead of just on occasion at a parade or something. For a long time in Lens, France, seen in this painting, The roads were uneven and difficult to walk on because of the marsh environment. They were also rather poor in this region, so a quick fix besides paved roads was to just wear stilts. During the 1800s, wearing stilts in this area was the way to get through and transport yourself from place to place. 1. Macaroni fashion. Listening to the old British song, Yankee Doodle, a rhyme concocted to make fun of Americans, you hear the line that Yankee Doodle stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. To modern listeners, that sounds really random. Why would this man suddenly confuse his hat with pasta? But they were really referencing a style called macaroni fashion that started in 1760. This style was popular amongst the aristocrats of Britain, consisting of large wigs like this guy has and slender clothes. Macaroni was considered fashionable, like these guys.
Thank you for watching. Stop on by Wacky Universe for more videos like this one, and I'll see you next time.